And one of the things that I'm trying to emphasize right now is that the political process around this should be a competition of ideas and practices. Even in climate too, better is always possible. But it means that if you want to take something out, if you want to axe the tax, to use the phrase, what are you going to put in that's better? That's going to be more effective, that's going to be more efficient, that's going to drive things and create jobs and opportunities and incomes for Canadians in a better way. And there are options on that. But we should hold, if a society, as we have decided, as I say, it is the law of the land. It's not just a talking point. That's where we want to go. Then I think we should hold our political class, penitential or prosperity-driven, to use your framework, to how are we going to get there? What are you going to do? How's it going to drive it? And why is it better? Why is what you're saying better for Canadians than what the alternative is?
On the question of investment, there's an emerging market. If you can see it ahead of time and you invest early, you'll get greater returns. How is that investment to be organized? I mean, to use the word organized suggests that the market isn't going to do it on its own, perhaps. But to take a concrete example, so in Canada, both the federal government, one party, the Quebec government, a different party, the Ontario government, different parties. So 3 different parties have decided to invest, is the term they would use, in electrical vehicle battery plants in different parts of our country. The Northvolt one went bankrupt the other day. Is that, I mean, what do you think about that, in that you want investments in what you would argue is the future prosperity of a climate transition, that there's money to be made, jobs to be had, prosperity, et cetera. How does that investment get there, in that here's a concrete example that is...
So, yeah, okay, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm just going to, you slipped in a little premise there, which I'm just going to stomp on.
You may have heard of think tanks before, but have you heard of Cardus? We're here to think, to explore, to propose solutions about work, education, health, family, faith communities, and what makes a society actually thrive. Faith shapes our questions. Evidence drives our answers. If a flourishing society is a priority for you, you really ought to learn more about Cardus.
Just to be clear, and I'm going to stomp on it because you said, I would say would lead, like it's just an opinion. It's not just an opinion. Let's throw a few facts out here. Paris Accords 8 years ago. At that time, investment globally, oil and gas, pipelines, infrastructure is about $900 billion a year. Investment in clean energy of all types, wind, solar, batteries, nuclear, etc., hydro, about $500 billion. So it's 2 to 1. Conventional to clean. This year, it's 2 to 1 the other way around. 2 trillion, more than 2 to 1, $2 trillion clean energy globally, about 900 billion again in oil and gas. One line's going like this, the other line's going like that. This year, separate point related, 90%, that's not 90% of all the power built globally is wind and solar. Okay? Like, the direction is clear. These are not whims. This is where things are going. This is also true. There is still a role for oil and gas. There's still a role for Canadian oil and gas, which gets to your question about LNG. It gets to questions about whether we should do the pathways, which I think we should, for the oil sands. So there's still a role for that. But in terms of where the world's going, where the opportunity is, and what we have, and we're in one of the best, we in Canada, in one of the best positions to build this out. What's going to be necessary for trade and for data centers and all that. I think the direction is absolutely clear, and I don't have $2 trillion to invest, so a lot of other people seem to think that's the case as well. Okay, so that's the premise.
That's the stomping
That's the premise
part.
stomp. It's the premise stomp because it sounds, it just sounds like it's. I think we in this country, I don't think we fully appreciate how fast things are moving. And in this regard, and I think we overweight what's happening south of the border. It's not surprising, but it's a big world, and some big decisions taken. Okay. I'll give one other example of this, just to ram it home. Microsoft, we know Microsoft, big company. It is a big company. It spends $1 billion a day now on data centers and clean power. Microsoft only wants clean power because its objective is to be net negative by 2030, which means that all of it will more than compensate for any emissions it's had, and it wants to make up for all the emissions that they have been responsible for, including in using Microsoft products, so the electricity, et cetera, since Gates, what was his name? Gates, yeah.
Bill Gates.
Yeah,
Yes.
Gates was in the garage in Albuquerque and started the company. So, and Google's got something similar, and on and on. So the scale of where things are moving. Okay, so now I've said all that, and now we've run out of time for me to answer the battery question. Look, I think the issue there, the way I think about that is as follows, and I'm going to make a general point, which I do think for scarce taxpayers' dollars, we need to focus on carbon value for money, what I would call carbon value for money. So in other words, what emission reduction are we getting for the investment tax credit and the production tax credit? And is that accruing to Canada, or is it accruing, in the case of batteries that get put in cars that then go to the United States and reduce their emissions, but not so much our emissions? And so what's the dollar per ton equivalent? It's not beyond our ability to do these calculations. And if it's relatively high, what else are we getting for it? And because there's cases where you'd say, yeah, it's actually pretty expensive relative to buying everybody who needs, who's on fuel oil, buying them a heat pump and giving them a hybrid heat pump so they can use some natural gas when it's really cold and normal. It's relatively high relative to that. And it has less of a direct impact on a large number of Canadians. So what else are we getting for that? And of course, the argument is that what we're getting is a competitive auto industry going forward, and the jobs and the multiplier effects of that, and avoiding the dislocation. It's a valid argument, but it should be framed, I think, much more in those terms. And one of the themes is of the discussion is we've got scarce resources, including very much for our social programs, and healthcare and beyond. And so you always should be the case, but particularly now, we've got to be as impactful as possible with the money that we're spending on climate.
Okay, good. We do have actually a little bit one other question, then we'll get to the
Is this like a week?
audience questions. No, it's not even a week. It feels like you've been here a week.
I only have like 15 minutes of material, so I'm trying to stretch it out.
50. You only have 15 minutes of things worth to say. You might be suited for electoral politics, after all.